first up, I am going to introduce Dr. Nicholas Spowski, Mr. David Hall, Miss Lucy Hutchinson, and Miss Melody Harrogate. And they are from the University of Derby. And I'm absolutely delighted. So each session is going to be 15 minutes. So if you want to just start uploading your slides there and getting organized. And the title of this presentation is Belonging Enough? So it might actually continue that conversation. There was a question in the first hour. So is belonging enough? Nostalgia, mattering and belonging as a framework for inclusive online practice in the pandemic. Absolutely delighted to have you and welcome you here to QUB. Nicholas, so if you just want to get organized there, and if you need any assistance, just ask.
You are. Thank you very much.
I'll keep an eye on
those. Can you see that slides?
Something's coming through here now. Sometimes it's a bit slow, so. Yep, I see it. See, that's perfect. Okay, I'll keep an eye on the time.
You see the title slide?
Yep, perfect.
All right then, that's great. Well, thank you for to Akila for the last presentation. There was a lot of food for thought in there, and a lot that maybe connects with this short presentation that I'm giving on behalf of a group of us in the Institute of Education at the University of Derby online. I'm Nicholas Bowskill, and I'm doing this on behalf of David Hall, Lucy Hutchinson, and Melody Harrogate. And we're really asking the question, is belonging enough? There's so much that's said and written about this concept of belonging. Has it become meaningless, or is it focused? And is it enough on its own anyway? We're looking at nostalgia, mattering and belonging as a framework for inclusive online practice, and specifically focusing this talk on the first wave of the pandemic. I'm hoping you can see the change of slide there. This work comes from the research that we did during the first wave of the pandemic. This is a online Masters in Education that we deliver at the University of Derby. And the participants in this Masters programme are all practicing teachers around the world. So the teachers, the participants are in Europe, Asia, Africa, South America, and sometimes North America. And they are in different sectors of education, mainly schools, but secondary, primary, some private sector. And as part of our research, we were interested in exploring different experiences of the first wave of the pandemic and the technology that they used. And we interviewed 28 of the program participants. This comes from a particular module called Innovative 21st Century Teaching, a look at the use of technology for learning and teaching. And that module became very much more of interest, shall we say, much more authentic learning in that first wave. So the participants were particularly engaged in this module. We asked them how they coped as a school and individually with the sudden move online. And the model that I'm going to show you from this research is drawn from just two participants in these 28 interviews. And they were of interest as special cases in some respects, because they said that their schools coped quite well, and indeed very well, with the sudden change to the online setting. So we were particularly interested to find out, well, you know, what did they do that made them feel so happy, if you like, with the way they coped with that change? How did they use the technology? First wave was one of the research questions, and what was the emotional response, the reaction, if you like, to the uses of their technology during that first wave? So there were three particular ways in which they used the technology, which are not particularly surprising to anybody. I don't think I'm interested in introducing you to anything earth-shattering, but there were three particular ways in which they used the technology, and this is the first one. They used the technology to make everybody's experience as flexible as possible. And to give you some idea, incidentally, the two cases, one was in the UK and the other was in China. So it's quite interesting that they were, you know, very far apart as well. But anyway, for instance, when teachers met with senior management in the schools, it had traditionally been at straight after teaching had finished. They were then called to the office, and when they were tired and exhausted from the day's teaching, they were then having to have those meetings. With the introduction of the technology during the first wave, they were able to take a break and possibly to get something to eat or have a rest or whatever, and then to organize the meetings. And when the school returned to the physical classroom, they continued that practice afterwards because it was so popular and so humane, as it were. Obviously, there was flexibility for the students in using the materials that were then provided for them. And the school also organised an annual school conference online in which the participants could engage with that conference flexibly. So all of these things that had previously been set times and at particular places changed as a consequence of the pandemic and made everybody's experience more flexible. So that was one way in which the technology was used, if you like. The other was that the technology made things more communal. If you like, it grouped people much more. It made them aware of what we might call entitativity, a sense of groupness. And this came about through the collaboration that was necessitated by working from home. But suddenly teachers were contributing to the ability of the school to deliver a conference. Teachers were pooling ideas in a shared online space, creating training materials for each other. They were using WeChat to discuss and notify each other of these materials and how they went, how well they went when they were implemented. Suddenly, departments were collaborating to create materials cross-disciplinary. For example, music, art, and drama were traditionally teaching their classes separately, and ne'er the twain would meet. But suddenly now they were collaborating to produce learning materials for art, which contained aspects of all these different fields. And the heads were scrapping newsletters and making video newsletters, if you like, videos for parents. And also the parents, relatives and carers suddenly had access to lesson content. So the digital materials produced by the teachers were not only delivered to the learners, but also were used and caused a degree of interest and engagement from the parents, relatives and carers. So this whole use of technology combined to make the experience communal. And the third way in which technology was used or experienced was that the practice became suddenly visible. So whereas they were traditionally in their classrooms delivering their lessons and off they would go, suddenly all this digital content was being produced and shared across the school and across the community with parents and carers and so on. And this practice suddenly became much more visible. Teachers were able to see the materials produced by their colleagues, and they were able to identify good practice and adopt and learn from each other that way, in ways that were much more difficult otherwise. And likewise, managers suddenly had a sense of institutional practice that they had not previously had. So that was making this practice as a school and as individuals much more visible to one another. So having identified these three ways in which these schools were using technology, we were then interested to look, and particularly here we're looking at a school level approach, an institutional level approach, rather than individual use of technology. And we were interested then to explore the data and to see what the kind of effects of these uses of technology was. And we then tried to map these emotional responses onto these uses of technology through our analysis. So what we found was that the use of technology to make things more flexible for people seems to have caused people to feel as though others cared about them, as though suddenly they mattered. And by mattering, we mean a sense that we are valued by others or that we add value to others. People felt that somebody actually cared and that they actually mattered in the process. And it is possible to feel that you feel a sense of belonging without feeling that you matter. So, you know, when we were talking earlier in the previous session about distinctions between mattering and belonging, belonging is a sense of group membership, a sense of belonging and sharing the norms of a group. Whereas mattering is that sense of having value, either being valued by others or that we add value. And this is one consequence then of the technology making experience flexible. We found that because technology made their experiences communal and it developed a sense of entitativity, a sense of groupness, if you like, that participants in the school, parents, carers, teachers, and learners, had a greater sense of belonging, a greater sense of what they were belonging to. This entitativity, it became you know, much clearer, and they were contributors to it. They were engaged with it, producing and sharing these materials and making for a communal experience through the collaboration. And finally, that this making this experience visible, this experience of this very unpredictable and very scary and something that they'd not previously experienced, doing this together and it becoming so visible to them induced a sense of nostalgia. It was a yearning, if you like, for the sense of togetherness generated and made visible through the digital interaction. And so our speculation, and it is only speculation, we're still working on the data and we're still looking at ways of developing this work, is that this combination, rather than this idea of is belonging enough, this combination of belonging and mattering and nostalgia, each interact, possibly, we suggest, to create a sense of institutional well-being through this use of these uses of technology, making flexibility, communal sense of togetherness, and making all of this visible, creating this archive as well that they still use, interestingly, having returned to the school. And so we're offering this as our,
just so you know.
Yeah. So this is our model of emotional good practice for institutions. In other words, we're suggesting if you use this combination of technologies in these ways, it may give rise to these positive aspects and contribute to institutional well-being. So this is our emotional model of good practice. There is a health warning. It's 2 cases. They're not even representative of the sample. They're certainly not representative of the module or of the wider world. They're the only cases that reported nostalgia at all. And we're still developing the model and looking at an agenda for further research. So the question for you to consider, perhaps, now or later, is whether any of this has any resonance for yourselves, either during the first wave of the pandemic or in your use institutionally of technology. Thank you very much.